The sun was setting over a quiet suburban neighborhood, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The streets were calm, with only the occasional sound of children laughing or dogs barking in the distance. On one porch sat James Wilson, an elderly man in his late 70s, sipping a cup of tea. His hands, though wrinkled with age, still bore faint scars from battles fought decades ago. James had served as a soldier during the Vietnam War, earning medals for bravery and sacrifice. After returning home, he settled into this small community where he raised his family, volunteered at local schools, and became a beloved figure among neighbors. James lived alone now. His wife had passed away years earlier, and his children had grown up and moved to different parts of the country. But loneliness didn't weigh heavily on him. He found joy in simple things like tending to his garden, reading old books, and occasionally polishing the rifle that had been handed down through generations of his family. It wasn't just any rifle. It was a relic of history, a piece of his past that connected him to his father and grandfather. He often told stories about how his ancestors used it during hunting trips and how it symbolized resilience and survival. To James, the rifle wasn't a weapon. It was a memory keeper. That evening, as usual, James brought out the rifle to clean it. Sitting on his porch, he carefully wiped away dust and applied oil to keep it in good condition. The task was almost meditative for him, a way to reconnect with his roots. Unbeknownst to him, however, a pair of eyes watched him from across the street. A neighbor, whose face James barely recognized, snapped a photo of him holding the rifle and sent it off to the local police department with a vague message. "Suspicious activity near my house. Elderly man with a gun. Could be dangerous." Within minutes, 2 police cars screeched to a halt outside James's home. Their flashing blue and red lights pierced through the serene dusk, startling James. Before he could even stand up, 2 officers stepped out of their vehicles, their expressions stern and authoritative. One of them shouted, "Put your hands where we can see them." James froze, unsure of what was happening. Slowly, he placed the rifle on the wooden floorboards of his porch and raised his hands above his head. "What's going on?" James asked, his voice calm but tinged with confusion. "Don't move, stay right there," barked one of the officers, his hand resting on the holster of his gun. The other officer approached cautiously, his eyes fixed on the rifle lying near James's feet. "I'm not doing anything wrong," James said firmly, trying to maintain composure. "This is my property. That rifle has been in my family for years. I'm just cleaning it." But the officers weren't listening. They seemed more focused on the image of an older black man holding a firearm than on the context behind it. Without asking further questions or attempting to understand the situation, they ordered James to step down from his porch. As he complied, they roughly grabbed his arms and forced them behind his back, snapping handcuffs around his wrists. James winced at the tightness of the metal biting into his skin. "You think you can scare us with that thing?" One of the officers sneered, picking up the rifle and examining it. "People like you always have something to hide." The comment stung deeply. James had spent decades serving his country, enduring hardships most people couldn't imagine, only to be treated like a criminal in his own home. "I'm a veteran," he said, his voice trembling with frustration. "I fought for this nation. You're disrespecting everything I stood for." The officers ignored him, muttering under their breath about how guys like him always played the victim card. James felt a lump form in his throat. He wanted to argue, to demand respect, but he knew better than to escalate the situation. Instead, he stood silently, his heart pounding as the officers shoved him into the back seat of their patrol car. Neighbors peeked out of their windows, some shaking their heads in disbelief while others whispered amongst themselves. At the station, James was processed without much explanation. The officers claimed they were acting on credible information, though no one bothered to clarify what made the anonymous tip so trustworthy. James sat in a cold, dimly lit cell, replaying the events in his mind. How could this happen? Why were they treating him like a threat when all he'd done was sit peacefully on his porch? The weight of the injustice pressed down on him, making each passing minute feel longer than the last. Meanwhile, word of James's arrest spread quickly through the neighborhood. One of his closest friends, Sarah, decided to take matters into her own hands. She called James's son, Marcus, who lived several states away. Marcus, a successful attorney, listened intently as Sarah recounted the details. At first, he thought it must be some kind of misunderstanding. But as she described the aggressive behavior of the officers and the lack of evidence against his father, anger began to simmer inside him. "This isn't right," Marcus muttered, pacing back and forth in his office. "They can't treat someone like Dad this way, not after everything he's done for this country." Determined to get answers, Marcus immediately booked a flight home. He also reached out to a few contacts within veterans organizations, hoping to rally support for his father. By the time he landed, the story had already gained traction on social media. Dozens of posts condemned the arrest, calling it racially motivated and unjust. Local news outlets picked up the story, airing interviews with neighbors who spoke highly of James. The narrative was clear. A respected veteran had been humiliated and wrongfully detained based on flimsy accusations. Back at the station, the officers responsible for the arrest remained oblivious to the storm brewing around them. They patted themselves on the back, believing they had done their duty by cracking down on potential danger. Little did they know their actions would soon come under intense scrutiny, not just from the public, but from higher authorities as, well, unbeknownst to everyone involved, the FBI had been monitoring reports of discriminatory practices targeting veterans. In recent months, there had been whispers of hate groups exploiting elderly veterans for propaganda purposes. When James's name appeared in connection with the arrest, Special Agent Lisa Carter flagged the case for immediate review. Something about it struck her as suspicious. The vague nature of the tip, the aggressive handling of a decorated veteran, and the dismissive attitude displayed by the arresting officers. Within 30 minutes of James being booked, a team of FBI agents stormed into the precinct, demanding access to all records related to the arrest. The room fell silent as the gravity of the situation sank in. For the first time, the officers began to realize the enormity of their mistake and the consequences that awaited them. The tension inside the police station was palpable as the FBI agents entered, their presence commanding immediate attention. Special Agent Lisa Carter led the team, her sharp eyes scanning the room with authority. Clad in formal suits and carrying folders filled with documents, they moved with purpose, exuding an air of seriousness that silenced everyone in the precinct. Officers who had been casually chatting moments earlier now stood frozen, unsure of what to do or say. The sudden intrusion disrupted the usual rhythm of the station, leaving officers exchanging uneasy glances. Agent Carter wasted no time. She approached the desk sergeant, flashing her badge and introducing herself in a firm tone. "We're here regarding the arrest of James Wilson," she announced, her voice steady but unyielding. "We need access to all records, including witness statements, evidence logs, and audio recordings from the scene." Her words carried weight, and the sergeant nodded nervously, motioning for someone to retrieve the requested files. Meanwhile, two other agents began questioning staff members about the events leading up to James's detention, jotting down notes with precision. Meanwhile, in the holding cell, James sat alone, his thoughts swirling like a storm. He replayed every moment of the arrest. The harsh commands, the dismissive comments, the cold metal of the handcuffs biting into his wrists. Each memory stung more than the last. Despite his military training, which taught him to remain composed, under pressure, James couldn't shake off the feeling of helplessness. For the first time in years, tears welled up in his eyes. He felt betrayed, not just by the officers who arrested him, but by the system he once trusted. As he sat there, lost in thought, a young officer named Kevin approached the cell. Unlike the others, Kevin looked hesitant, almost apologetic. He glanced around to ensure no one was watching before speaking softly. "Sir, I'm sorry this happened to you," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "I've heard stories about your service. It's not fair." James looked at the young man, surprised by the unexpected kindness. "Thank you," he replied simply, his voice heavy with emotion. "But apologies won't change what's been done tonight." Kevin nodded, visibly uncomfortable, and quickly walked away, leaving James alone again. Though brief, the exchange gave James a flicker of hope, a reminder that not everyone wore the uniform with malice. Outside the station, the crowd continued to grow. Neighbors, friends, and even strangers gathered, drawn by news of the veteran's arrest. Some held signs, reading "Justice for James" and "Respect our veterans," while others chanted slogans demanding accountability. Reporters armed with microphones and cameras jostled for space, eager to capture sound bites from those protesting. Among them was Sarah, James's neighbor, who passionately recounted how she'd known him for over 20 years. "He's the kindest man I've ever met," she told a local news crew. "To treat him like a criminal is shameful." Back inside, Marcus arrived at the station, his face etched with determination. Dressed in a crisp suit, he strode through the doors with confidence, brushing past reporters who tried to stop him for comments. Inside, he found chaos: FBI agents interrogating officers, clerks scrambling to gather documents, and civilians whispering anxiously in corners. Ignoring the commotion, Marcus approached the front desk and demanded to see his father. When the clerk hesitated, citing protocol, Marcus leaned forward, his voice low but menacing. "Listen carefully," he said. "My father is a decorated war veteran unlawfully detained based on zero evidence. If you don't let me see him right now, I'll make sure the entire world knows exactly how this department operates." The threat worked. Within minutes, Marcus was escorted to the holding area where James was being kept. Seeing his son brought a mix of relief and sorrow to James's face. "Marcus," he whispered, standing up as the cell door opened. Father and son embraced tightly, neither saying a word for several seconds. Finally, Marcus pulled back, his expression hardening. "Dad, tell me everything," he urged. And so, James recounted the night's events in detail, his voice trembling with frustration and pain. As Marcus listened, his anger grew. By the time James finished, Marcus's fists were clenched, and his jaw was tight. "This isn't just about you, Dad," he said firmly. "This is bigger than us. They messed with the wrong family." Turning to the guard standing nearby, Marcus added, "Get my father released immediately. We're leaving." Though reluctant, the officers complied, knowing the mounting pressure from both the FBI and public outrage made resistance futile. As James stepped out of the station, blinking in the bright lights of cameras and flashbulbs, the crowd erupted into applause. Strangers cheered, offering words of encouragement and support. For James, the overwhelming display of solidarity was bittersweet. It reminded him of the goodness still present in the world, but also of the deep flaws within its systems. While James reunited with loved ones outside, the atmosphere inside the station grew increasingly tense. The two officers responsible for the arrest were called into separate rooms for questioning by the FBI. One of them, Officer Harris, fidgeted nervously as Agent Carter grilled him. "Why did you arrest Mr. Wilson?" she asked, her tone icy. "What evidence supported your decision?" Officer Harris stammered, struggling to explain himself. "We got a tip. Said there was suspicious activity. We saw the rifle and thought it could be dangerous." "And did you ask him why he had the rifle?" Carter pressed. "Did you verify if it was registered? Did you consider his background as a veteran?" Harris shook his head, unable to meet her gaze. "No, ma'am. We acted on instinct." "Instinct?" Carter repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Or bias?" She let the question hang in the air, allowing the weight of her accusation to sink in. Harris shifted uncomfortably, realizing, too late, the implications of his actions. In another room, Officer Jenkins faced similar scrutiny. Unlike Harris, Jenkins attempted to defend himself, insisting they had followed proper procedures. But when confronted with inconsistencies in his statement and evidence suggesting racial profiling, his defenses crumbled. Both officers left the interrogation rooms visibly shaken, their earlier bravado replaced by guilt and regret. As the investigation unfolded, the FBI uncovered troubling patterns within the precinct. Internal memos revealed complaints from minority residents about discriminatory treatment, many of which had gone ignored. Surveillance footage showed instances of unnecessary force used during arrests, particularly against elderly individuals. These discoveries painted a damning picture of systemic issues that extended far beyond James's case. By the end of the night, the story had exploded nationally. Social media platforms buzzed with hashtags like Justice for James and Our Veterans Matter, drawing attention to the plight of marginalized communities targeted by law enforcement. News outlets aired interviews with veterans advocacy groups, civil rights activists, and legal experts, all condemning the arrest and calling for reform. Politicians weighed in, promising investigations and policy changes to prevent such incidents in the future. For James, the whirlwind of events left him emotionally drained yet oddly hopeful. Though the evening had started with humiliation and despair, it ended with a renewed sense of purpose. Surrounded by his son, neighbors, and supporters, James realized he had become part of something larger, a movement for justice and equality. As he climbed into Marcus's car to go home, he turned to his son and said quietly, "We have work to do." And indeed they did. What began as a wrongful arrest would soon evolve into a nationwide conversation about respect, accountability, and the enduring legacy of those who served their country. The days following James Wilson's arrest were a whirlwind of activity, both for him personally and for the broader community. News of the incident spread like wildfire, igniting conversations across the nation. Social media platforms buzzed with outrage as people shared videos, photos, and posts about James's wrongful detention. Hashtags like Justice for James and Plans Respect Our Veterans trended on Twitter, while Facebook groups dedicated to supporting veterans rallied behind the elderly man. Local news stations aired segments featuring interviews with neighbors who spoke passionately about James's character and contributions to the community. Even national outlets picked up the story, framing it not just as an isolated case of police misconduct but as a symptom of deeper systemic issues. Inside the police station, however, the mood was somber. The two officers responsible for James's arrest, Harris and Jenkins, found themselves at the center of a firestorm. Once confident in their actions, they now faced intense scrutiny from multiple fronts: the FBI, internal affairs, and public opinion. Both men had been suspended without pay pending further investigation, a decision that sent shockwaves through the department. Their colleagues whispered among themselves, some defending the pair while others quietly acknowledged the mistakes made during the arrest. For Harris and Jenkins, the weight of their choices grew heavier with each passing day. Sleep eluded them as guilt gnawed at their conscience. They replayed the events over and over in their minds, wondering if things could have gone differently, if they had taken the time to listen to James instead of jumping to conclusions. Meanwhile, Special Agent Lisa Carter continued her probe into the precinct's practices. Armed with evidence gathered during interrogations and document reviews, she uncovered disturbing patterns. Complaints filed by minority residents described similar experiences of racial profiling and dismissive treatment. One file stood out. In particular, a letter written months earlier by a young black teenager accusing Officer Jenkins of harassment during a routine traffic stop. The complaint had been ignored, buried under bureaucratic red tape. Another report detailed how elderly Hispanic residents were disproportionately targeted for minor infractions, often subjected to excessive force. These findings painted a grim picture of institutional bias within the department. Agent Carter also delved into the anonymous tip that sparked the entire ordeal. Tracing its origin proved challenging. It came from a burner phone purchased with cash, leaving no trail to the sender. However, the vague nature of the message raised suspicions. Why target James specifically? Was this part of a larger effort to discredit or intimidate veterans? Or perhaps someone harbored personal animosity toward him? While these questions lingered unanswered, Carter remained focused on holding those accountable who mishandled the situation. Outside the station, Marcus Wilson worked tirelessly to ensure his father received justice. As an attorney, he understood the complexities of navigating legal systems, but this case struck close to home. Every sleepless night fueled his determination to expose the truth and demand accountability. He reached out to civil rights organizations, including the NAACP and veterans advocacy groups, seeking guidance and support. Together, They drafted petitions calling for reforms within law enforcement agencies, emphasizing the need for sensitivity, training, and stricter oversight. Marcus also scheduled meetings with local lawmakers, urging them to introduce legislation protecting veterans from discriminatory practices. James, too, found himself thrust into a role he never anticipated, that of a symbol. Though initially reluctant to engage with the media, he eventually agreed to give interviews, believing his voice might inspire change. Sitting beside Marcus during televised appearances, James recounted his experience calmly yet powerfully. "I served my country faithfully," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion behind his words. "And when I returned home, I expected to be treated with dignity and respect. Instead, I was humiliated because of the color of my skin and assumptions made about me." His remarks resonated deeply with viewers, many of whom flooded social media with messages of solidarity. Veterans from all walks of life chimed in, sharing their own stories of discrimination and marginalization. A Vietnam-era nurse named Patricia posted a heartfelt video thanking James for speaking out, saying, "You've given us hope that our voices matter." Others organized rallies in cities nationwide, carrying banners emblazoned with slogans like "Protect Our Heroes" and "End Racial Profiling Now." One such rally took place outside the police station where James had been detained. Hundreds gathered peacefully, chanting slogans and holding candles in honor of victims of police brutality. Among the attendees was Sarah, James's neighbor, who delivered a stirring speech. "We're here today not just for James Wilson," she declared, her voice echoing through the crowd, "but for every person who has ever felt invisible because of their race, age, or background. This is about fairness. This is about humanity." As the protests gained momentum, pressure mounted on city officials to take action. The police chief issued a formal apology to James and his family, acknowledging the harm caused by the department's failure to uphold justice fairly. "What happened to Mr. Wilson should never have occurred," he stated during a press conference. "We are committed to addressing these issues head-on and ensuring such incidents do not happen again." The statement, though sincere, did little to quell public anger. Protesters demanded concrete steps: body cameras for all officers, independent review boards to investigate complaints, and mandatory diversity training programs. Back at home, James struggled to adjust to the sudden attention. Reporters camped outside his house, eager to capture sound bites or photographs. Friends and strangers alike stopped by to express their support, bringing food, flowers, and letters of encouragement. While grateful for the outpouring of kindness, James longed for the quiet life he once cherished. Late at night, sitting alone on his porch, he reflected on the events that had transformed his world. Though proud of the movement growing around him, he couldn't help but feel sorrow for the pain endured along the way. Marcus noticed his father's weariness and suggested taking a break from the spotlight. "You've done enough, Dad," he said gently one evening. "Let me handle the rest. You focus on healing." James nodded, appreciating his son's concern, but deep down he knew the fight wasn't over. He owed it to himself and to countless others to see this through. In the weeks that followed, tangible progress began to emerge. The FBI released a preliminary report highlighting systemic flaws within the precinct, prompting calls for sweeping reforms. Lawmakers introduced bills aimed at increasing transparency and accountability in law enforcement. Community leaders hosted town hall meetings to discuss ways to bridge divides between residents and police. And slowly but surely, attitudes started to shift. For Officers Harris and Jenkins, the journey toward redemption would be long and difficult. Internal Affairs recommended disciplinary action, including demotion and mandatory counseling. Both men issued public apologies admitting their errors and pledging to learn from the experience. Whether genuine or coerced, their statements signaled a willingness to confront their biases, a crucial step toward rebuilding trust. As autumn leaves began to fall, James stood on his porch once more, rifle cleaned and resting beside him. This time, though, he wasn't alone. Neighbors joined him, chatting amiably as children played nearby. The scars of the past remained, but so did the promise of a brighter future. James smiled faintly, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. His battle may have started with an unjust arrest, but it ended with a legacy of hope and resilience, a testament to the enduring spirit of those who refuse to be silenced. As the weeks turned into months, the ripple effects of James Wilson's arrest continued to spread far beyond his quiet suburban neighborhood. What began as a single act of injustice had ignited a nationwide conversation about systemic racism, police accountability, and the treatment of veterans. The story of an elderly black veteran wrongfully detained for simply cleaning a family heirloom rifle resonated deeply with millions of Americans. It became a symbol of broader struggles, of marginalized communities fighting for recognition, of veterans seeking respect, and of ordinary citizens demanding change. For James, life slowly returned to some semblance of normalcy, though nothing would ever truly erase the memory of that fateful evening. He tried to reclaim the peaceful routines he once cherished, tending to his garden, reading books on history, and occasionally polishing his rifle. But the scars ran deep. Nightmares plagued him, replaying the harsh voices of the officers and the cold bite of the handcuffs. Yet, amidst the pain, there was solace in knowing he wasn't alone. His son Marcus remained steadfast by his side, ensuring James didn't shoulder the burden entirely. Friends and neighbors also checked in regularly, offering companionship and support. Their presence reminded James that even in moments of darkness, humanity could shine brightly. Marcus, meanwhile, channeled his anger into action. Determined to prevent others from enduring similar injustices, he threw himself into advocacy work. He partnered with civil rights organizations, veterans groups, and legal experts to draft comprehensive reform proposals targeting law enforcement practices. One initiative focused on implementing mandatory cultural sensitivity training for all officers, emphasizing the importance of understanding diverse backgrounds and experiences. Another proposal called for the creation of independent oversight boards tasked with reviewing misconduct allegations impartially. These measures aimed not only to hold officers accountable, but also to rebuild trust between law enforcement and the communities they served. Public pressure played a critical role in pushing these reforms forward. Across the country, protests continued, with activists demanding meaningful change rather than empty promises. In cities like Chicago, Atlanta, and Los Angeles, demonstrators marched through streets chanting slogans such as "No Justice, No Peace," and "Protect Our Elders." Social media campaigns amplified their voices, drawing attention to other cases of racial profiling and police brutality. Stories poured in from individuals who had faced similar mistreatment. Elderly men stopped while walking home, teenage girls interrogated without cause, families torn apart by baseless accusations. Each tale added fuel to the growing movement, underscoring the urgent need for reform. Back in James's hometown, the police department scrambled to address mounting criticism. Following recommendations from the FBI report, the precinct implemented several changes. Body cameras were distributed to every officer, ensuring interactions with the public were recorded transparently. Community outreach programs were launched to foster dialogue between residents and law enforcement. Officers attended workshops designed to challenge implicit biases and promote empathy. While some viewed these efforts as mere damage control, others saw them as genuine steps toward progress. Despite these developments, the two officers responsible for James's arrest, Harris and Jenkins, faced ongoing consequences. Internal affairs concluded their investigation, finding both men guilty of misconduct. Harris received a demotion and suspension without pay for 6 months, while Jenkins was dismissed from the force altogether due to his history of discriminatory behavior. Though harsh, the punishments reflected the severity of their actions and served as a warning to others within the department. The fallout affected Harris and Jenkins personally as well. Once respected members of the community, they now found themselves ostracized. Friends distanced themselves, fearing association with controversy. Family members expressed disappointment, urging them to reflect on their choices. For Harris, guilt consumed him. He spent sleepless nights replaying the arrest in his mind, haunted by the image of James standing on his porch, hands raised in surrender. Eventually, he sought therapy, hoping to confront the biases he hadn't realized existed within him. Jenkins, on the other hand, struggled to accept responsibility. Bitter and defensive, he blamed external factors for his dismissal, refusing to acknowledge his role in perpetuating harm. Amidst the chaos, James emerged as a reluctant yet powerful advocate for justice. Though initially hesitant to embrace the spotlight, he recognized the platform his story provided. Invitations poured in from universities, community centers, and veteran organizations asking him to speak about his experience. At first, James declined most requests, overwhelmed by the attention. But Marcus encouraged him to share his voice, reminding him of the impact it could have. Slowly, James agreed to participate, delivering heartfelt speeches that combined personal anecdotes with calls for unity and understanding. One particularly memorable event took place at a local high school auditorium packed with students, teachers, and parents. Standing behind a podium adorned with an American flag, James recounted the events of his arrest in vivid detail. His voice trembled as he described the humiliation of being handcuffed and dragged away from his home. Tears filled the eyes of many listeners as he spoke of the betrayal he felt, not just from the officers but from a system meant to protect him. Yet instead of dwelling on bitterness, James shifted his focus to hope. "We cannot change the past," he said, pausing to collect himself. "But we can shape the future. We can choose to listen to one another, to see each other as human beings rather than labels or stereotypes. That's how we heal. That's how we grow." His words earned a standing ovation, followed by a lively Q&A session where students asked thoughtful questions about resilience, forgiveness, and activism. Inspired by James's courage, several teens vowed to start anti-racism clubs at their schools, determined to carry the torch of change. The momentum extended beyond individual efforts. Lawmakers introduced legislation inspired by James's case, aiming to safeguard veterans and elderly citizens from discriminatory practices. Dubbed the Veterans Dignity Act, the bill proposed stricter penalties for law enforcement officers found guilty of racial profiling and mandated annual reviews of policies affecting minority groups. While passing the act required navigating political hurdles, bipartisan support signaled a promising start. In addition to legislative strides, grassroots movements gained traction. Neighbors organized volunteer patrols to monitor police activity and document potential abuses. Artists created murals honoring James and other victims of injustice, transforming blank walls into vibrant tributes. Musicians composed songs celebrating resilience and solidarity, spreading messages of hope through melodies. Even local businesses joined the effort, donating portions of their profits to organizations supporting veterans and marginalized communities. For James, witnessing these collective efforts brought a sense of fulfillment. Though the journey had been painful, it reinforced his belief in the goodness of people. Late one evening, as he sat on his porch watching fireflies dance in the twilight, Marcus joined him. They sat in comfortable silence for a while before Marcus broke it. "You've started something incredible, Dad," he said softly. "People are listening. They're learning." James smiled faintly, gazing at the stars above. "It's not just me," he replied. "It's everyone who refuses to stay silent. Change doesn't come from one person. It comes from all of us working together." And indeed, that was the truth. What began as a wrongful arrest had evolved into a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of perseverance, empathy, and collective action. As the world moved forward, James Wilson's name would forever be etched in history, not as a victim, but as a catalyst for transformation. The months following James Wilson's arrest transformed not only his life but also the lives of countless others who rallied around his cause. What had started as a personal tragedy evolved into a nationwide movement, sparking conversations about justice, equality, and accountability. The momentum showed no signs of slowing down. Instead, it grew stronger with each passing day, fueled by the determination of activists, lawmakers, and ordinary citizens alike. For James, adapting to his new role as an advocate was both challenging and rewarding. Despite his initial reluctance to embrace the spotlight, he found strength in the connections he made along the way. Veterans from across the country reached out to share their stories, many expressing gratitude for his courage in speaking out. Some sent letters recounting their own brushes with discrimination. Elderly vets stopped while jogging, young enlistees profiled at traffic stops, families interrogated during routine travel. Each story reinforced the reality that James's experience was far from unique. It was a sobering realization, but it also deepened his resolve to keep pushing for change. One particularly poignant moment came when James received a letter from a World War II veteran named Charles. Now in his late 90s, Charles wrote about how he too had faced prejudice after returning home from war. "They called us heroes overseas," he penned, "but treated us like criminals here." Enclosed with the letter was a faded photograph of Charles standing proudly in uniform beside his comrades. Touched by the gesture, James framed the photo and placed it on his mantelpiece, a reminder of the shared struggles spanning generations. Meanwhile, Marcus continued to lead efforts to reform law enforcement practices. His partnership with civil rights organizations yielded significant results, including the introduction of the Veterans Dignity Act in Congress. The bill gained widespread bipartisan support, thanks in part to Marcus's relentless advocacy. He testified before legislative committees, sharing James's story alongside data highlighting systemic biases within policing. His eloquence and passion captivated audiences, earning praise from both sides of the aisle. Though passing the act required overcoming political gridlock, its progress signaled a turning point in addressing long-standing inequities. Public pressure played a crucial role in advancing these reforms. Protests remained a constant presence in cities nationwide, with demonstrators demanding tangible action rather than empty promises. In New York City, thousands gathered outside City Hall, holding signs that read, "Accountability starts now," and "Justice for all veterans." Similar rallies took place in smaller towns where residents organized marches despite limited resources. Social media campaigns kept the conversation alive, amplifying voices often ignored by mainstream outlets. Hashtags like "Respect Our Heroes" and "End Racial Profiling" trended repeatedly, drawing attention to ongoing injustices. Back in James's hometown, the police department worked to implement changes recommended by the FBI. Officers attended mandatory training sessions focused on implicit bias, de-escalation techniques, and cultural competence. Community forums provided opportunities for residents to voice concerns directly to law enforcement leaders. While skepticism lingered among some community members, others cautiously welcomed the initiatives, hoping they would foster greater trust over time. Despite these efforts, tensions persisted. Former Officer Jenkins struggled to reintegrate into society after losing his job. Unable to find employment due to the stigma attached to his dismissal, he spiraled into depression. Friends and family distanced themselves, leaving him isolated and bitter. On the other hand, Officer Harris took steps toward redemption. After months of therapy, he began volunteering at a local youth center, mentoring teenagers interested in pursuing careers in law enforcement. Though hesitant at first, the teens warmed up to him, appreciating his honesty about past mistakes. For Harris, teaching the next generation became a form of penance, a way to make amends for the harm he caused. As the legal proceedings against Harris and Jenkins concluded, attention shifted to broader systemic issues. Activists pushed for increased transparency in hiring and disciplinary processes, arguing that accountability should extend beyond individual officers to encompass entire departments. Independent oversight boards were established in several jurisdictions, tasked with reviewing complaints impartially and recommending policy changes. These measures aimed to create checks and balances, ensuring no single entity held unchecked power. James's influence extended beyond legislation and protests. Artists, musicians, and writers drew inspiration from his story, using their platforms to amplify messages of resilience and unity. A mural depicting James cleaning his rifle adorned the side of a downtown building, accompanied by the words, "Strength through struggle." Local musicians compose songs honoring veterans, blending soulful melodies with lyrics calling for justice. Even poets joined the effort, penning verses celebrating the enduring spirit of those who refuse to be silenced. In schools, educators incorporated James's story into lesson plans, encouraging students to reflect on themes of empathy and social responsibility. High school history classes discussed the intersection of race, military service, and civil rights, prompting lively debates among teenagers eager to engage with current events. College campuses hosted panel discussions featuring experts in criminal justice reform, sociology, and veteran affairs. These conversations inspired young people to take action, whether through organizing fundraisers, writing op-eds, or volunteering with grassroots organizations. For James, seeing this collective energy brought a profound sense of fulfillment. Though the scars of his arrest remained, they were softened by the knowledge that his ordeal had sparked meaningful change. Late one evening, as he sat on his porch watching the sunset, Sarah, the neighbor who had alerted Marcus to the arrest, joined him. They chatted quietly about everything that had transpired since that fateful night. "You've given so much to this community," Sarah said gently. "Not just now, but your whole life. You deserve peace." James nodded thoughtfully. "Peace doesn't come easy," he replied. "But if my story helps even one person feel less alone, then it's worth it." As the weeks turned into months, James noticed subtle shifts in his neighborhood. Neighbors greeted him warmly, going out of their way to express gratitude for his courage. Children waved enthusiastically whenever they passed his house, often stopping to ask questions about his time in Vietnam. Their curiosity reminded James of the importance of storytelling, not just as a means of preserving history, but as a tool for fostering understanding. At the same time, challenges persisted. Critics dismissed the movement as overly idealistic, arguing that systemic racism couldn't be dismantled overnight. Others accused activists of targeting law enforcement unfairly, claiming the majority of officers performed their duties honorably. While these criticisms stung, they didn't deter James or his supporters. Instead, they doubled down on their efforts, determined to prove that lasting change was possible. By year's end, the Veterans Dignity Act passed with overwhelming support, marking a historic victory for advocates. The legislation mandated stricter penalties for racial profiling, required annual audits of police practices, and allocated funding for community outreach programs. Lawmakers hailed it as a landmark achievement, crediting James's bravery for inspiring its creation. During the signing ceremony, James stood beside the governor, his chest swelling with pride as cameras flashed and applause erupted. Yet, even as celebrations unfolded, James remained grounded. He knew the fight wasn't over, not entirely. True progress required sustained effort, vigilance, and collaboration. As he addressed the crowd gathered for the ceremony, his voice resonated with quiet authority. "This is just the beginning," he said, pausing to let his words sink in. "We've taken a step forward, but there are miles to go. Let's continue working together, to listen, to learn, and to build a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect." His message echoed far beyond the room, reaching hearts and minds across the nation. For James Wilson, the journey had been painful, exhausting, and transformative, but it had also reaffirmed his faith in humanity's capacity for growth and redemption. As he returned home that night, surrounded by loved ones and neighbors, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Change might not happen overnight, but with persistence and unity it was inevitable, and James intended to be part of every step along the way. The passage of the Veterans Dignity Act marked a pivotal moment in James Wilson's journey, but it was far from the end of the road. The legislation symbolized hope and progress, yet James understood that laws alone couldn't dismantle deeply entrenched systems of bias and inequality. Real change required more than signatures on paper. It demanded consistent action, open hearts, and unwavering commitment from individuals at every level of society. As the months rolled by, James continued to embody the spirit of resilience and advocacy, inspiring others to join him in shaping a better future. For James, Life slowly began to settle into a rhythm that blended his quiet routines with newfound responsibilities as a public figure. He returned to tending his garden, finding solace in the familiar act of nurturing plants from seedlings to full bloom. Yet now his porch became a gathering spot not just for reflection but for dialogue. Neighbors stopped by regularly to discuss ongoing efforts to improve community relations with law enforcement. Teachers brought students to hear James speak about his experiences, using his story as a teaching tool to foster empathy and understanding. Each interaction reminded James of the power of connection, the simple yet profound act of listening to one another. Marcus, too, remained deeply involved in the fight for justice. With the success of the Veterans Dignity Act, he expanded his focus to address broader issues affecting marginalized communities. Partnering with national organizations, he launched initiatives aimed at dismantling systemic racism within various institutions, schools, healthcare systems, and workplaces. His work took him across the country, speaking at conferences, leading workshops, and collaborating with policymakers. Though demanding, Marcus found fulfillment in knowing that his efforts were part of a larger movement toward equity and fairness. Meanwhile, the ripple effects of James's case continued to reverberate nationwide. Activists seized the momentum, organizing campaigns to hold other police departments accountable for discriminatory practices. In cities like Detroit, Houston, and Miami, protesters called for reforms modeled after those implemented in James's hometown. Independent oversight boards sprang up in multiple jurisdictions, ensuring transparency in investigations of misconduct. Body cameras became standard equipment for officers, providing crucial evidence in cases of alleged abuse. These changes, though incremental, represented tangible steps toward rebuilding trust between law enforcement and the communities they served. Back in James's neighborhood, the police department worked diligently to repair its fractured relationship with residents. Officers participated in cultural sensitivity training programs designed to challenge implicit biases and promote empathy. Community forums provided opportunities for open dialogue, allowing citizens to voice concerns directly to law enforcement leaders. Slowly but surely, attitudes began to shift. Officers who once approached their duties with skepticism learned to see residents as allies rather than adversaries. Residents, in turn, grew more willing to engage constructively, recognizing the importance of collaboration in fostering safety and accountability. Former Officer Harris emerged as an unexpected advocate for reform. After months of volunteering, at the youth center, he realized the impact of mentorship in breaking cycles of mistrust. Encouraged by the teens he mentored, Harris shared his story publicly, admitting his mistakes and urging others to confront their own biases. His vulnerability resonated with audiences, humanizing the complexities of systemic injustice. Harris's transformation served as a reminder that redemption was possible, even for those who had caused harm. Officer Jenkins, however, struggled to find redemption. Isolated and embittered, he retreated further from society, unable to reconcile his actions with the backlash they provoked. Friends and family occasionally reached out, hoping to guide him toward healing, but Jenkins resisted their attempts. His story stood as a cautionary tale, a stark contrast to Harris's journey toward accountability and growth. As the years passed, James's legacy extended beyond policy changes and protests. Artists immortalized his courage in murals, songs, and poetry, ensuring his story would endure for generations to come. Schools named scholarships and awards after him, celebrating students who demonstrated leadership in promoting equality and justice. Veterans organizations invited James to speak at annual events, honoring his contributions to the cause. Through these tributes, James became more than a man wrongfully arrested. He became a symbol of perseverance, dignity, and hope. Yet despite the accolades, James remained humble. He often remarked that he never sought fame or recognition. His goal had always been to protect the values he fought for during his time in Vietnam. Sitting on his porch one evening, surrounded by neighbors and friends, James reflected on how far they had come since that fateful night. The scars of his arrest still lingered, but they no longer defined him. Instead, they served as reminders of the strength forged through adversity Sarah, his neighbor, leaned over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've given so much to this world, James," she said softly. "Don't forget to take care of yourself, too." James smiled, nodding in agreement. "I'm learning," he replied. "Every day is a new lesson." That fall, the community came together to celebrate the 5th anniversary of the night that changed everything. What started as a wrongful arrest had blossomed into a movement that touched countless lives. The event featured speeches, performances, and art exhibits showcasing the collective efforts of residents, activists, and officials. Children recited poems they had written about unity and resilience, while musicians played soulful melodies dedicated to James's courage. At the heart of the celebration stood James himself, flanked by Marcus and Sarah, basking in the warmth of gratitude and admiration. Addressing the crowd, James spoke with characteristic humility. "This isn't my victory," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "It belongs to all of us, to everyone who refused to stay silent, who chose compassion over indifference, and who believed in the possibility of change. Together, we've shown that even in our darkest moments light can emerge." His words drew thunderous applause, followed by a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. As fireworks lit up the sky, casting colorful reflections on faces young and old, James felt a deep sense of peace. The road ahead would undoubtedly present challenges, but he knew the foundation laid by their collective efforts was strong enough to withstand them. In the months and years that followed, James continued to inspire others through his actions. He volunteered at local shelters, mentored young veterans adjusting to civilian life, and advocated for policies supporting elderly citizens. His presence became synonymous with kindness, wisdom, and resilience, a testament to the enduring power of grace under pressure. Ultimately, James Wilson's story transcended headlines and hashtags. It became a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the face of injustice, ordinary people could spark extraordinary change. By choosing to rise above bitterness and channel his pain into purpose, James proved that true strength lies not in vengeance but in forgiveness, not in division but in unity. And as long as there were those willing to listen, learn, and act, the flame of justice would continue to burn brightly, lighting the path toward a fairer, more compassionate world.